Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm John Kiriakou, here with Michelle Whitty. We're continuing to see significant fallout from the ouster earlier this week of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The House GOP is in a state of chaos, and interim Speaker Patrick McHenry has recessed the House while Republicans try to figure out who they want to lead them. Several names already are in the mix. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise seems to be the favorite at this early stage, and House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan also has announced his candidacy. A few other names have been mentioned, but Donald Trump said yesterday that he had taken a dozen calls from House Republicans urging him to become the next Speaker of the House. The Constitution specifically says that the Speaker of the House does not have to be a member of Congress. Don't worry, though, Donald Trump's not going to be the Speaker of the House.
It's my time.
Meanwhile, the House has devolved into retribution. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and former Majority Leader Steny Hoyer were stripped of their hideaway offices in the Capitol building. A moderate Republican from Ohio said that he would put forth a motion in the Republican caucus to throw Matt Gaetz out of the Republican Party. And another moderate said that he would make a similar motion to throw out all 8 Freedom Caucus members who voted against McCarthy. Politico says today that the Speaker's race comes down to Scalise versus Jordan. The two apparently have a healthy dislike for one another, and neither has the 218 votes necessary to become Speaker. This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. The news seems to be getting worse and worse for New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. Menendez and his wife have been indicted on 3 counts of bribery. That's each. And now we're learning that the 2019 Mercedes-Benz that Menendez allegedly received as a bribe was meant to replace a car that Menendez's wife, at the time she was his girlfriend, crashed in 2018. That accident resulted in a man's death. New Jersey Pauls are chomping at the bit to run for Menendez's seat. Representative Andy Kim already has announced his candidacy, and the wife of Governor Phil Murphy is calling wealthy Democratic donors to say that she's going to run. And this week has held some good news for former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. The poll bump that she received after each of the first 2 Republican presidential debates seems to have stuck. In a new poll released yesterday, Haley has pulled into a strong second in New Hampshire. That poll shows Donald Trump at 49, Haley at 19, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at 10%. In a new poll from South Carolina released today, Trump is leading with 50%, followed by Haley at 17 and DeSantis at 12. All other candidates were in single digits in both states. Meanwhile, DeSantis announced this morning that his campaign had raised $15 million in the last quarter and that he would spend $5 million of that on advertising just in the state of Iowa. We're going to talk about all this with Steve Grumbine. He's the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. Steve, welcome back. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Good to be back, man.
Oh, glad to have you. Let's start with the chaos on Capitol Hill. I've seen a handful of Republicans over the past 2 days blame this chaos on Democrats in general, on Nancy Pelosi, even on AOC this morning. Literally nobody believes that this is the case. Everybody recognizes that Kevin McCarthy's agreement to allow one single member to file a motion to vacate doomed him from before he even took office. The House is in recess right now. Republicans won't begin to choose a new speaker until next week. But what about this motion to vacate rule? Do you think it's going to change?
I really don't. One of the harshest realities is that the Republicans show America, regardless of whether we want to categorize this as a complete circus or not, they've shown point blank how power works. And they've shown that a small number of senators or House members can make a big deal. They showed that they took the Joe Manchin playbook and took it to fruition. The squad has never shown such spine. So on so many levels, this is, I kind of blow off the narrative that is going on out there. And instead I choose to focus the energy on how we keep continually looking at small groups of progressives and leftists and saying, what could they possibly do? There's only just a couple of them. Well, wrong. We just saw the Freedom Caucus rip a speaker out because he agreed to do something that they didn't like.
Right. Imagine.
And they were able to make that happen. I think that there's a bigger story here. And I'm part hopeful and part laughing. Because, it just shows you how when you have the will, there is a way, even if it's the bad guys, so to speak, doing it. Just because they don't represent what I want doesn't mean that their tactic to get what they think they want isn't effective.
Yeah.
And it is effective. And they showed, in my opinion, how to wield power out of power.
Yeah. Agreed. The conventional wisdom is that this is a two-man race between Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan. The two don't like each other. They have different bases of support. And it seems clear that neither one, at least at this stage, has the requisite 218 votes to become speaker. How do you think this can be resolved? And what kind of horse trading should we expect to see? Do you think it's going to be as bad as what McCarthy had to give up?
I don't know. I will say this. Scalise seems to be the guy that will get the majority of Democrats to support him compared to, when they go through the full process. Bottom line is that he's the only one that has any kind of bipartisan appeal.
Yeah.
Jim Jordan is a MAGA guy. Point blank.
Right.
And so the idea there, of anything actually happening, it comes down to, it would have to be Scalise. But as far as it goes, though, if you think about it, Trump remains large and in charge across the country. All the polls show the closest person's 31 points away.
Yeah.
So does Jim Jordan carrying the MAGA, banner stand a chance to be powerful even with that small Freedom Caucus? I wouldn't bet against it. But I think Scalise has the chance of getting the moderates to line up behind him, even though I wouldn't call him moderate by any stretch of the imagination.
I would agree with that. Politico today is floating the idea of Scalise and Jordan running as a slate, where Scalise would be the speaker and Jordan would be the majority leader, and each would take care of his own constituency, with Scalise focusing on sort of your mainstream conservatives and moderates, and Jordan handling the MAGA people. That sounds great on paper, but how in the world would that work when Jordan's constituency, and remember, Jordan was the founder of the Freedom Caucus, his constituency is demanding a government shutdown and massive cuts in discretionary spending that are so massive that they're not even supported by Senate Republicans.
You know what? This is the standard for the economic illiteracy in this country. The two of them are neither, let me just say this, neither one of them represents anything that anybody should smile about. They're both terrifying. But put them together, there's history. I wish I could call on the names, but there has been history where presidents have gotten vice presidents that they despised.
Right.
But to make both sides work together. Could it work? Absolutely. It's worked before. I wish that I had total recall in the history of that, but I know that has happened more than one time. So it is completely possible. If they can't get that number down, if they can't get one of them through the door, the trade-off would have to be something like that for it to work. And I think that's probably the closest thing they have to making it work, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. The Wall Street Journal and other outlets are saying today that this turmoil in Washington is bad for Wall Street. And indeed, the market dropped sharply 2 days ago. How big of a setback for the big banks and investment firms is this uncertainty on Capitol Hill? And why did they respond so negatively to something that is going to be relatively temporary, right? What's the big deal? We're going to get a speaker. The government is eventually going to reopen, if it's even shut down in the first place. So why crash the markets?
Oh, it's pretty clear. See, what is not written in the papers and what is not talked about on enough of the talking head shows is that Wall Street knows that when government stops spending, the economy goes into recession. They also know when government stops spending that when people stop spending, they stop buying their products. So when you look at Wall Street, even though Wall Street is hardly representative of the rank and file street economy, it does understand the flow of money. Mm-hmm. And once you choke that off, and if these radical Republicans are able to get those discretionary cuts right at a time when student debt has started back up, you're talking about people know, they know, and the people in finance know. The flows from government balance sheets, when you look at the Treasury's inflows and outflows, you understand that when the government is in surplus, the private sector, it is absolutely in deficit. And when it's in deficit, that is very, very, very bad for business. So I think that's what they're seeing. It's not about the speakers so much as it's about the idea that people coming in and slashing and burning and cutting off the government spigot, that really will choke Wall Street. It will not just choke Wall Street, but it'll choke Main Street as well.
I've also got to ask you about the government shutdown. So now we're like 41 days away from the end of the continuing resolution, the passage of which led to McCarthy's ouster. So 41 days worth of funding left. There's no indication that the Republican position of an 8.5% cut in discretionary spending has changed, right? They don't want to touch the Pentagon budget. They can't touch stuff that is off limits like Social Security and Medicare, but they want to just wipe out a lot of the rest of the federal government's programs. For example, they're talking about an 80% cut in student loans, 80%. So we know that that's the official Republican position. Why would we think then that position has changed because somebody else is going to be the speaker? So do you think that in 41 days we're headed for the same thing that we just got out of? We're headed for another shutdown?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, beyond a shadow of a doubt. One of the most important aspects to know is not only is that the debt ceiling, every time they come to the debt ceiling, right? Each one of these continuing resolutions is a joke. It's a farce. The government itself is obligated by the 14th Amendment to pay its bills, period. Okay? Mm-hmm. So we've got constitutional law that trumps any other law saying they have to pay the bills. Why they allow this to go through and continue to play this game is something that I think would take a lot longer to talk about than we have here. But the reality is that absolutely 100% the entire thing is a charade. But it's being used as a political cudgel to ensure the ability to take wins that were not democratically chosen. I mean, the fact is that every bit of spending that is going on, that is scheduled to be made, et cetera, has been passed by law. Mm-hmm. There's no spending without a law supporting it. So everything has already been spent into existence. All these bills have already been incurred. To cut that spigot off, it's just 100% detrimental to everything, but it's completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
So when we talk about Republicans, wanting 8%, this, that, and the other, the fact of the matter is that when you had McCarthy in there, McCarthy showed, even though he was willing to take the GOP's standard talking points to the table, he was willing to negotiate, and he was willing to make deals that just absolutely roiled those Freedom Caucus members. Yes. So with a new MAGA-style speaker or a more conservative speaker willing to play to that base, you're talking about a much more literal chance, not only of a shutdown, but of those spending cuts coming into play. regardless of whether they're legal, whether or not they're constitutional, et cetera. So the reality is that this is extremely likely, and it's also extremely scary because the closer they get to the bone, the more people at the bottom are going to pay heavy. And that means the poor, that means government workers, that means families. It's got a tremendously harsh penalty for society if they're successful.
Right. Hey, let's talk about Bob Menendez for a minute. Menendez is in serious trouble. The 3 felony counts of bribery with which he's charged carry a combined sentence of 15 years in prison. He was found with $480,000 in cash rolled up in his suit jacket pockets, as well as gold bars hidden around his house. His own text messages seem to indict him. And now we learn that his wife killed a guy in a traffic accident. Is it even possible for Menendez to survive this politically? Even if he's acquitted, can he survive this politically?
You know, politically, yeah. Unfortunately, I think he can survive it politically. But
New Jersey,
you see that the vultures are circling.
Oh, yeah.
And the vultures are, definitely smelling blood in the water. And I would imagine that it won't take long for, I know Andy Kim is one that's put his hat in the ring. Right. I know that others have as well.
Yep.
It would not shock me one iota. If quite honestly, if Menendez survives it, it wouldn't shock me. But it also wouldn't shock me at all to see someone like Andy Kim step in. And I have no love for Andy Kim either, but Menendez, it's just how much of a clown show politics has become that he does have a political chance, that he does have a puncher's chance to retain his role. It's just insane. But yes, he does have a chance.
So Andy Kim jumped right in like the day after Menendez was indicted. And First Lady Tammy Murphy is already telling people that she's running. She's been on the phone, according to Politico, with some of the big Democratic donors. Representative Don Norcross also said he's considering a race, but Republicans haven't said a word about Menendez or about this Senate seat. Do you think they're just conceding this race? Is it just about one Democrat replacing another Democrat?
I think that's it. And I also think that when you can allow, it's kind of like when you let somebody make a mistake, when you watch them screwing up, don't get in their way, let them do their thing. And I think that they're watching this and they say, oh my God, let them destroy themselves. Why should we lift a finger to do this when it'll look like we're just partisans here. Right. Let them just destroy themselves. And I think that's what you're saying.
I also wanted to ask you about Nikki Haley. She's nowhere near being able to challenge Donald Trump for the lead in any state yet. No. But her most recent poll, or at least the numbers coming out of several different polls, have to be making her very happy. She's clearly the number 2 in New Hampshire. She's clearly the number 2 in South Carolina, her home state. In Iowa, she's at 5%. Behind Trump at 41 and DeSantis at 13. There are so many possible scenarios between now and the start of the primaries. But what do you think about her showings right now?
I think she represents something different, right? And for those who are not interested in a return to MAGA, and for those that are not interested in MAGA Jr. and DeSantis, Haley represents a female, a different voice. She's still got the same terrible conservative politics. Right. But she represents a departure from that. And, it's sometimes the devil you love, the devil versus the devil you don't know. And in this case, I think people are tired at some level. I'm not saying all, because that's why Trump is still leading, because they're not tired of him. Right. But the people that are definitely looking for something. And I think Haley, she's got a lot of experience. She's got a track record. She's been the darling at different times, and she's fought through it and survived. So you see someone like her, and I imagine for those that are looking for a clear-cut alternative, she definitely represents an alternative to that.
Yeah. And what do you think about where things stand for Ron DeSantis? He seems to get weaker by the day, and his fundraising is nowhere near as robust as it needs to be. How does he make himself Donald Trump's marquee challenger again? Is it that he has to either do well or maybe beat Trump in Iowa? Because it looks like he's focused on Iowa now and is walking away from New Hampshire. Is that what we should expect from him?
Yeah, I think DeSantis is done. No matter what he does, I think he's done, because you really are dealing with the same person, Trump and DeSantis. The only difference is Trump is a more effective Trump than DeSantis is. Mm-hmm. And with DeSantis being seen as mini-me, I think he's literally lost. There was a moment, I think he had a moment, and that moment was when nobody thought that Trump would be around to run again. Mm-hmm. And I think that people were looking at him as the Trump alternative that would be most like Trump, that, you know, had governing experience, et cetera. And now that it looks like no matter what you throw at Trump, he's going to survive, I think that he's getting stronger and stronger. And I think that because it's the same base for DeSantis and Trump, I think that what you're seeing now is, I don't see any chance for DeSantis whatsoever, unless Trump literally is put in jail. And, you know, and that's it. I see zero chance for DeSantis. He's just the carbon copy, and they're you know, eating one another's lunch, if you will. They're the same base, the same people, the same, you know, constituents, mm-hmm. you know, that are pulling it. So I don't see any prayer for him at all. Going up to New Hampshire, going to Iowa, he can come up with a million strategies. The only alternative to Trump is Haley at this point. Yeah. And I see DeSantis fighting for his life, but it's like watching someone literally sliding in quicksand, reaching up as they're like, yeah, just sliding into the abyss. And that's what I see with DeSantis.
Do you remember Phil Crane? He was a conservative Republican congressman from Illinois, and he ran for president in 1980. That was the year that Ronald Reagan was elected, of course. But I remember the very first Republican debate. And in his opening statement, he said, "Vote for me. I'm the young Reagan." Well, why would we vote for you when Reagan is standing next to you? Yeah. Right? People are going to vote for Reagan if yes. Reagan's running. They don't so much care if you're the young Reagan when they get the real Reagan standing 3 feet away. And I get the same.
He's the wish.
Yeah, I get the same feeling from DeSantis. Vote for me, I'm the young Trump. Well, your voice is shrill and your Pittsburgh accent drives me crazy because he's not from Florida, he's from Pittsburgh. Okay. And Trump is kicking your butt all over the country, so why would people who love Trump vote for you instead? It doesn't make any sense to me. No. I agree with you, Steve. I think he's done. I think he just doesn't understand that yet.
And now they have Ramaswamy, who's, you know.
And there's Ramaswamy. He's the even younger Trump.
Yeah, and the somewhat Trumpier Trump.
Yeah, and Trumpier. That's right. That's right. Steve Grumbine, thanks so much for joining us. Steve is the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory.